Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. This is the new series that we have here at Stanball-Ness, the Seller-Doer Model, and today we're going to see what executives need to know. This presentation is going to be presented by Scott Butcher, who is our Director of SN's Strategic Growth Advisory Practice, which is new to Stanball-Ness, and we are grateful to have him with us this afternoon and to have him on our team. Just a few housekeeping items to get us started here. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop those in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar pane, as we do not monitor the chat box. And if you want to follow along with what Scott has on the screen up here, you can download that in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. And there's a few other documents in there that Scott will talk about in a bit. And last but not least, if you're here for those ever so popular CPE credits and to listen to what Scott has to say this afternoon, you will have to complete 3 polls that will be presented throughout the presentation. So make sure you answer all 3 of those to get that credit. And for us to realize that you need that credit, you need to go in and fill out that survey that's going to pop up after the webinar, excuse me. And there will also be a last place to put your questions, to tell us what we did great, to suggest other topics. So with that, Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us through this presentation this afternoon.
Awesome. Kaylee, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us to talk about the Seller-Doer model. If we were all mastering it, there would be no need for us to be on this call today. So I'm really excited to be part of this webinar. I'm really excited to be part of Stanball-Ness. And the reality is that, the Seller-Doer model has been near and dear to my heart for many years. When I was working on the architecture, engineering, and construction side, the firms I work with, we use seller doers. We saw the good, the bad, the ugly. I had the opportunity to lead some research initiatives around the seller doer model, and we're actually going to share a little bit of that with you today. And, more recently, the past few years, I've been working with companies to either develop strategy for their business development and seller doers or provide training to their seller doers, business development, soft skills, things like that seller doers usually don't get when they go to college, and a lot of companies don't offer internal training. And so, our title today is the Seller Doer Model, What Executives Need to Know. So what do you need to know? Well, let's get rolling here. So I love this quote, and this is attributed to different people over the years. Peter Drucker has repeated it. Near as I can tell, it comes from the mind of Henry Ford, and that is, nothing happens until somebody sells something. And I absolutely love that quote because, okay, we have this role in our companies of the seller doer, but they can't do until they actually sell. So what does that look like in your firm? Well, I'm going to share some data along the way from the Society for Marketing Professional Services. And the first thing I'm sharing here is a definition of what a seller doer is. And, full disclosure and transparency, I've been involved with SMPS at the leadership level for many years, and I was involved in creating this definition. So I take it with me wherever I go. Basically, when we're talking about seller doers, we're talking about technical staff or billable staff that have some responsibility for business development. It could be 2 hours a week. It could be 20 hours a week. But that's what we define as a seller doer. It's a role within a company, not a title. And depending upon the company, you might have different title for this role. We selected seller doer because it's about 12 to 15 times more popular than doer seller or doer closer. Some companies use doer seller to signify that more time is spent doing work than selling. Some companies use doer closer to signify that maybe a dedicated business developer opens the door, and then the seller doer, who is a closer, so they're the doer closer, they walk through that door that's been opened and they close the deal, get that contract. But ultimately, we chose it because selling becomes before doing. We must sell before we do. But in other companies, the role might be defined as an account manager, a client manager, a relationship manager, or some combination thereof. We're talking about the same thing. So why should we care about the seller-doer model? Well, there's a number of reasons. And, number one is we get more feet on the street. If we have dedicated business developers, they could always use the support of additional seller doers out there because we can canvas more, we can chase down more opportunities, we can meet with new prospective clients. We want the more feet on the street. There's a lot of clients out there that have become far more sophisticated. So they're expecting, really in-depth conversations from the very first conversation. They want that technical-led sales approach. And, I can tell you my background is not as an architect or an engineer. And doing business development and marketing for these companies, I was, at a little bit of a disadvantage that I didn't speak engineer. So a lot of the time it was looking for an opportunity to open the door for that technical leader to come in, that seller doer, to get the relationship to the next level. And one of the things that we've seen happening in the marketplace is a compression of that sales cycle. It used to be we could open a door, do the introduction, and say, I'll be back next month with, the person who would be your project manager or, one of our principals. And our clients, they don't have time for that anymore. So they're expecting pretty detailed conversations from that very first meeting. When we have good seller doers with good skill sets, they're a better representation of our company and our brand. They become our brand ambassadors. And we want to make sure that our front lines of staff members that are client facing, whether they're specific to projects or they're also engaged in the business development, that they truly are brand ambassadors and they truly articulate the value proposition that our company offers. We want seller doers to fire on all cylinders with our business developers if we have dedicated business developers in-house. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, experienced, or heard about the business developer that schedules an appointment and then they reach out to the seller doers and they say, I've got a good one on a hook, need to have somebody come with me to the meeting, and nobody says, I'll go. Everybody says, I'm too busy with billable work, I don't have time for this, and then they leave the seller doer dangling, the business developer dangling, because they don't have that seller doer to come with them. And that's a major issue at a lot of firms. I heard it within the past 48 hours from a client. So it happens all the time. So we want a better partnership between business development and the seller doers. Well, how about more work from existing clients? Most of us at our firms experience about 80% of our work is repeat from existing clients. So how do we get that? How do we make that happen? Well, a lot of seller doers are really focused on their existing clients. So maybe a project manager or a principal in charge, they're tasked with account mining, which is the marketing buzzword or the marketing jargon for getting more work from your existing clients, going deeper within the organization, mining for new services you could provide or to work at different locations than you're working at right now. So that's really a driver for companies wanting, the seller doer model to be successful. And then the past few years, I've really been seeing a lot of this. So there's the leadership transition and the ownership transition. So firm leadership is looking at that next generation, those emerging leaders, and they're saying, look, I'm a rainmaker. We're, the ownership, we're rainmakers. We're bringing the work in, but we're about to retire. We're about to sell. We need that next generation there, and they can't make it rain. They need those business development skills. So really, there's a major disruption coming to the company in the next few years as leadership transitions out, as ownership transitions out, and that next gen jumps up there into that role, and they're just not prepared. So we should care for a lot of different reasons. So a little bit about these roles, the lingo that I'm going to be using as we talk today. Seller doer is anybody that's balancing billable work with some business development. When I say the business developer, I'm talking about that dedicated position. Could be a BD representative, a director of business development, a manager of business development. A lot of times, these individuals have direct interface with the seller doers, maybe even partial authority or responsibility for the seller doer activities. So that you'll see is one of the challenges we see. And then the marketers, and these are the individuals within our companies that are generating name recognition. They're building the brand. They're creating the website and the collateral materials and Then on the business development side, they may be providing support by working on the proposals or developing the presentations that the seller doers or business developers are delivering at like project interviews or even introductory meetings. So that's the language I'll be using for our program today. So I mentioned SMPS. I'm going to share some statistics from you from this report, Sell, Do, Win Business. This was a research initiative I had the opportunity to lead, and we've put in the handout link for you a copy of this report you can download. It's free. You can go to the SMPS website and download it. There's a lot of really good information in there, and I'm going to share just a little bit of it, sort of as introductory information as we talk about this model. So maybe we should talk about what are the titles of a seller doer, because nobody has seller doer on the business card. Nobody would want the title seller doer on the business card. Even your seller doers probably don't like to be called seller doers because it has sell. Sell's a 4-letter word, right? So the titles that you know are shown here in this word cloud, and you know the way word clouds work. The larger the word, the more the frequency. So principal, partner, owner, sort of that top level of the seller doers. But right behind them, you see the project executive and the project manager. And a lot of firms that I have worked with, whether helping with strategy or helping with training, I see a lot of project managers and project executives that are part of that seller doer strategy. Lead engineer, lead designer, lead architect, pretty common, as well as president and CEO. But notice president and CEO aren't the largest categories, the biggest text there, because they have 27 other things that they're working on and worrying about. So they're not necessarily always the front lines of business development or of firms. So you see all the other titles there. From this SMPS research, we wanted to know, where do seller doers spend the time? And really, there's only two areas where we really need to discuss. And the first one, that big yellow circle there, half of seller doers spend more time working with their existing clients and some time working to develop new relationships. So half of all seller doers are heavy on existing and light, but still doing work with new clients. But look at that right beside it in the green circle. About 40% of seller doers split their time equally between existing clients and relationships and developing relationships with new clients, chasing those prospects down. And, in firms that have the dedicated business developers, oftentimes the business developers are the ones that are out there trying to establish at least the initial contacts and relationships with the prospective clients. But if you don't have the dedicated staff in business development, then of course your seller doers need to pick up the slack right here. This one, always cracked me up when I look at it. What percent of firms are using seller doers? And you can see, according to the data, it's 2/3 of construction firms, up to 85% of engineering firms. And the correct answer, of course, is 100%. I have yet to meet a firm in this industry where there wasn't some billable staff, technical staff involvement with getting a project across the finish line. It might be the principal in charge. It might be the project manager. But, we're always seeing these people engaged in the business development process, even if it's as the closer or, getting involved in writing the proposal and participating in the interview. Regardless, you look at the data and, as average of everything, 3/4 of firms in our industry, at a minimum, rely on seller doers for at least a portion of their business development. Now, one of the reasons that we did the research through SMPS is we were looking to see, has this model grown, and is this model going to continue to grow? And the answer to both is absolutely yes. So you can see here in the green there, it's, have you increased the number of seller doers in your firm over the past decade? And in the orange, have you increased the percent of time that your seller doers spend conducting business development? And you can see pretty significantly, construction firms, 41% have added seller doers, 60% have increased the amount of time that seller doers spend. That split was 45-45 for engineering firms. And a third of architecture firms have added seller doers, and 43% are having their seller doers spend more time doing business development. So you can see pretty significant growth of the seller doer model over the past decade. And then when you actually look at this next decade moving forward, it's also very significant. And you can see here that, in the green, are you anticipating increasing the number of seller doers that you have on staff over the next decade? More than half of all firms, A, E, and C, said yes. And then when you ask the question, are you going to increase the number of business developers that you have in-house? A little over a third of architecture said yes, and then half of construction and engineering firms said yes. So seller doers aren't, making business developers unemployed. Our firms have learned that we need more feet on the street. We just need a wider net. So we need more seller doers. We need more business developers. We need to be out there more. And so again, that's really driving the interest in the seller doer model. We looked at, how are seller doers spending their time in business development. And, here's just the top 5 that are going to client meetings. Of course they are. They're participating in project interviews. Yeah, if they're going to be on the project team, that's pretty important. They're writing proposals. If you were to look at what business developers are doing, they're not writing proposals. It's coming from the seller doers. But look here, number 4. Number 4, they are setting up appointments with prospects. And then number 5 was they're participating in client organizations. And so if you zoom out of this a little bit just to see how the data fell, look in the middle of the screen here. You can see presenting to client organizations is number 6 there. 60% of seller doers are actually out there presenting in front of IFMA or COA or ASHI or SAME or whatever organization they're engaged in. 58% are actually working to develop those presentations. And more than half are out there at trade shows, whether they're working the trade show at a booth or they're actually just on the floor out networking and meeting people. Why do firms use seller doers? Well, the research indicates that about 70% of firms say they use seller doers because of the client expectations. The clients wanting to have those in-depth technical conversations from that very first conversation, because they're pre-qualifying us. They're trying to decide if we're even worth talking to any further. Because if we can't answer their questions, they'll just move on to the next firm. Roughly half the firms said, well, it's our corporate culture. We've always done it this way. About a quarter of the firms said, there's some potential issues with the non-technical business developers being able to articulate our services, our value messages, the way we approach problem solving, the way we manage projects, whatever the case may be. About a quarter of the firms thought there might be some challenges there. Financial limitations was only 13%. We can't afford dedicated business developers. And then 8% said, we use seller doers because it's the only option. There aren't enough good business developers available right now. And this, I wanted to throw in this slide. This was from a different research project I led. It was published in November 2019. The report was called Marketing 2022, also released by the Society for Marketing Professional Services. If you're interested in seeing the whole thing, drop me a note and I'll see that you get a copy. Primarily what we were looking at was how have business-to-consumer marketing approaches entered the AEC industry today, and what does that look like moving forward? But as part of the research, we wanted to know, if you look at all sales approaches and all marketing approaches, what's the most important right now, and what do you think will be the most important in the next couple of years? And if you look there, top right, 2022, client experience. 70% of respondents thought client experience will be one of the most important approaches to sales and marketing moving forward. Right now, it stands at just slightly over half. So who's on the front lines of client experience? Well, of course, it's our seller doers. They are interfacing with those clients from the very beginning till the end of the project, and hopefully after the project to keep that relationship going. So where our firms are moving with sales and marketing really elevates the importance of the seller doers to the sales and marketing model. Networking, of course, you would expect to be pretty high. Number 3 there for next year, thought leadership. Half of firms are rating that really high. And who's providing the thought leadership? Well, it's our subject matter experts. It's our discipline leaders, our project managers, our principals. These are the ones that might be blogging or speaking to professional associations or appearing on video. So, there's a huge role for seller doers in the marketing and business development process at our firms. And that's only going to increase moving forward. So, Kaylee, we have arrived at our first poll question. What we're going to do is we're going to ask you about the effectiveness of the seller doers you have in your firm right now, asking you to rate them. So, Kaylee, can you bring up the poll, please?
Alrighty, so the question is, again, how would you describe the effectiveness of your current seller doer program? What are you doing today in your organization? Think back on that and let us know on a scale of highly effective to highly ineffective. There's a couple questions in the questions box, Scott, just let you know for the end.
Excellent.
And we can also check in privately if we don't get to those. There was quite a few audio issues in the beginning with a couple people. I hope that they're resolved by now. If not, just a reminder to everybody, this presentation is being recorded this afternoon and will be posted on our website just in case you missed the first 5 minutes or so. So we're just waiting for a few more to vote here. Just a reminder, you need to answer all 3 polling questions to get that 1 CPE this afternoon and fill out that survey at the end. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and take this down and share the results with everybody. So Scott, here is your crowd. So you have about 16% say highly effective, and a majority of the crowd, over half, 62% say somewhat effective, 10% say neither one or the other, 10% say somewhat ineffective, and there is a 1% that do say it's highly ineffective. So hopefully they can take something away from here this afternoon and implement it immediately.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kaylee. So, okay, there's great news there. If 16% of you already view it as highly effective and more than 60% is somewhat effective, so a lot of you are here just looking to improve a program that's already doing pretty well. And so that's great. And, for 21% of the firms, we have a lot of room for improvement. There's a pretty big gap. So let's talk about some of the challenges of the seller doer model, because we all see this in our firms. And, sometimes it's quite obvious why it doesn't work, and sometimes we're just not totally understanding it. But there is this gap, this delta between what we are expecting out of the seller doers and what we're actually seeing out of the seller doers. And I really like to look at 5 buckets or 5 categories for where these challenges fall. Most of them will roll up into these. Basically, the knowledge base of the seller doers, the guidance or the direction that they're receiving, the amount of time that they have available, or the amount of time at least that they're spending on their business development activities. How about accountabilities for seller doers? And then finally, incentives. Are there incentives for seller doers, or are there none? Is it lacking? So let's talk about knowledge. And what we found in that SMPS research is that 2/3 of firms that have seller doers are not providing any type of business development training. And I think that's crazy. It doesn't surprise me because I hear that all the time. I see that all the time. But you hire a structural engineer or a construction manager, and they've gone to school for 4 or 5 years and been trained. They got the degree, and then they're hired, and they're sort of being mentored for 3, 4, 5 years before they're ready to move into that role as a lead structural engineer or the project manager for a construction manager. And they have so much training that takes place over that period. A lot of times what we do in the industry with seller doers is we promote people who are really good doers. A really good mechanical engineer becomes the department manager of the mechanical department, or they're promoted to become a project manager. And suddenly they're told, okay, as a project manager, go get work. Have fun. See ya. And that's a recipe for disaster, but yet we see it again and again and again in our industry. When we ask firms, okay, for the 1/3 of you that are providing training, how are you handling the training? Where's it coming from? Just under half are using internal resources. We're actually seeing a lot of business development staff being asked to conduct business development training for the seller doers or even the marketing staff, but it also might be coming from the principals or just really experienced seller doers. Little more than a quarter of the firms are just relying on external sources. So you might send somebody to a 1-day or a 2-day boot camp or do it virtually, or you might bring in a trainer and have more of a customized program. And then roughly a quarter of firms are using a combination of both the internal and the external. When asked, okay, if you're doing training, what are the topics that you're covering right now? Well, we're seeing little more than 60% are doing public speaking, how to deliver a presentation. A little more than half, networking best practices. That's a common thread that we see. About half are also doing how to develop a presentation. So there's actually delivering it when you're in front of the audience, and then there's creating it. So that's the third one here. Writing proposals, particularly if you have your company's standards, what makes a good proposal, what doesn't, what can you say, what can't you say, how do you create a scope of work, that sort of thing. And then, the old, how to have a conversation. How do you strike up a conversation with somebody you don't know? So then when we ask the question of the firms that are both offering training as well as those that aren't offering training, what would you like to see as far as topics? Well, number one was how to get the most out of a client organization. So you join IFMA, COA, ASHI, SAME, SCUP, whatever the case may be. What do? How do you develop relationships? How can you leverage your membership in that organization to lead to opportunities for your firm? Second one, how do you develop a client capture plan? I've been told I need to go meet with company XYZ. They don't know who we are. What should my plan of action look like? That's what a capture plan is. Third one should be no surprise, the whole time management, balancing, selling, and doing. The fourth most common was market research, just a little more than a quarter. That could be market research on how do I find the firms or the organizations that I should be calling on, to how do I find the people and track down the right people within the organization, the director of engineering, the facility manager, the plant manager, the municipal engineer, whatever the case may be. And then the fifth most requested training topic is networking best practices. Now I'm going to share a little bit later in this presentation some information that I have from personal experience of when I've worked with companies on providing training to their seller doers. What were the actual topics that they selected? So I'm going to share that with you in just a little bit. So let's talk about another challenge here. Another challenge is direction. So the seller doers aren't being given the proper direction on what they should do, or we're pushing them to do the wrong things. So first of all, there's no formal strategy. Maybe we have a formal marketing and business development plan and it was not shared with the seller doers, or maybe we don't have one. So not only do the seller doers not have a plan, the company doesn't have a plan. But regardless, there's no formal strategy that the seller doers can be following to ensure success, or at least get a step closer to success. Maybe there's no defined reporting structure. And this is something that I see pretty frequently, that you have your seller doers, a lot of them are primarily doers, and they report, maybe a project manager reporting to a director of operations or a COO. And so for their business development time, which is a smaller piece of their pie, they're not really reporting to anybody. And so what happens is they default to the doing, they default to what's comfortable. And when there's an issue, when somebody says you should be doing more business development, they go to the COO and they say, I've got 45 hours scheduled on the project this week. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to go chase companies that don't know we exist, or do you want me to keep the client happy and do this work so we get repeat business? Well, the answer to both is yes. Yes, it is. They're both incredibly important. But this lack of a defined reporting structure allows doers to focus on the doing more than the selling. So we're seeing that pretty frequently. How about the shoehorning into the wrong fit? We have people that don't feel comfortable. They don't have the right acumen to be out there doing networking. They have stranger danger. They're terrified in that environment, or they cut their teeth in the higher education field, and they've worked on all sorts of types of buildings on college campuses, and we tell them to go call on manufacturing or call on healthcare or call on governmental. And they're a fish out of the water. It's not a good fit for their background and their knowledge base, much less their comfort level. And then finally, maybe there are goals, and the goals were handed to them and said, go make this happen. Well, you know how it works at our companies, how it works with you personally. If you're not involved in actually setting the goals and establishing the criteria, you don't feel ownership of it. So that's something that we see with seller doers. They're handed a to-do list of these are your goals, make it happen, but they don't really feel passionate about it. They might disagree and think, we're doing things the wrong way here. This doesn't make sense. I don't feel comfortable doing this. And so we're throwing up roadblocks that are prohibiting us from having greater success. Also, with the lack of direction, we often see the lack of focus. So, if we don't tell these seller doers where to spend their time, they'll try to find the path of least resistance. Where I would see it a lot is, I worked for a company where we did a lot of work in the manufacturing sector. So, food processing facilities, automotive, warehouses and distribution centers. And we had some seller doers, and, when they would, get out there, if they didn't have proper guidance, they'd come back and say, hey, there was this classified ad in the newspaper today for a new police station, and they're looking for a design firm, but we don't design police stations. Well, I did one when I worked for Firm X about 15, 18 years ago. It's like, oh, well, do you have a reference person there that would, talk about it? Oh, no. I was just a CAD operator on that one. I didn't even meet anybody. Well, then why do you want to pursue a police station? So when we don't give them focus, seller doer might go off anywhere, and it might not align with our strategic plan. So we want to avoid that from happening. Obviously, time's a big issue. Balancing the selling with doing, giving them enough time to dedicate to business development. Even if we only budget for them 2 hours or 4 hours a week, we have to make sure they have the time. And so I sure wish I knew who said this to me. They said, at their company, the mantra was the most important project is the next project. I love that. I've stolen it. I've used it 1,000 times over. Because the reality is, no matter how things are going with that current project, no matter how much that client loves you, if you don't have that next project waiting in the wings, if you're not pursuing really multiple potential projects to get that next one in the door, you're going to have those peaks and valleys. And this industry, the design and construction industries, we see it all the time. You're so busy, you're overloaded, you're at a peak, and nobody's paying attention to business development. And then you come off the peak and you're down in that valley. And what do you do when you're in the valley? Well, you lay off staff, or staff senses that, they're sitting around their desk twiddling their thumbs, not working, so they go and find other jobs. You cut hours, and when you cut hours, then you see staff leaving. So we want to level out those peaks and valleys. That's really an important role for the seller doers. And this is why we need to focus on this mantra of the most important project is the next project. So here are some of the challenges in time when we're doing our budgeting for our year, for the month, for the person. We're not putting in weekly hours in business development. We're putting that as a responsibility for them. Oh, you're a seller doer, but we're not budgeting that time. Or maybe we budget the time, but then we don't allocate those hours. We get into those weekly staffing meetings, and, each seller doer has 45, 48 hours of billable work, and we're not allowing time for business development. So it's not happening. Guess what? It's a structural issue. As leadership, it's our fault, but we can't let that happen. We're not having the seller doers charge their time to business development as a specific account. So a lot of companies I see, they put their charges elsewhere. So we can't even track how much time they're spending in business development. Or maybe they're charging time to business development, but 85% of their time is spent working on proposals. So they're being reactive. It's important work. It has to be done, but they're not doing anything proactive for business development. We're not prioritizing business development time over project time. Like I said, they're equally important. We have to do both. But too often, business development gets placed on the back burner because we say, well, we got to keep this client happy. Yes, we have to keep the client happy, and we have to have that next project lined up or somebody's going to get let go, right? Or we're going to lose money. So we need to be focusing on prioritizing business development. And, that's cultural. That has to be cultural in our firms. And then finally, we have our seller doers pull that business development time from what I call the city dump, GO, general overhead. And you hear it, oh, well, you're only 80% chargeable per our budget. So you have 20% of your time for business development. Well, okay, vacation comes out of there. All your PTO is coming out of there. The time you spend attending those weekly staffing meetings, maybe you're on some company committees, that's coming out of there. Just developing master specifications or the filing or the stuff you have to do for projects that's not built, it all comes out of there. And so when we say your hours should just come out of that city dump that we budgeted, well, it's not really fair to the seller doers because we're not really setting an expectation for them. So we need to get away from that. And then there's the lack of accountability. This comes from that SMPS research. We ask about goals, what positions in your firm have goals. And there's a whole lot of red on this chart. Maybe the principal owner or partner has business development goals, but it starts to drop off pretty significantly as you go down to various positions within a firm. So we need to have more goals for our seller doers. For companies that do set goals for seller doers, it might be broken out a little differently based on repeat clients or your existing clients versus your new clients. But here's how it looks. The top one was the dollar value of projects won. Number two was the quantity, the number of proposals run. Then the dollar value of projects proposed. Then the quantity of leads or opportunities identified. These were for the repeat clients. And then when we looked at it for the new clients or the prospective clients, number one, again, was the dollar value of projects won. Second was the number of proposals won, then the number of leads or opportunities identified. So, companies are using metrics, but not a lot of them have goals for these different positions. And these aren't necessarily your best key performance indicators either. Particularly as you have a newer seller doer or somebody that's not spending a lot of time in it, can you really say, well, Scott, you need to bring $1 million of work this year? We need that. What we're seeing companies start to do now is focus on team-based goals. So your team needs to bring in $1 million worth of work. And part of your goal for that is going to be you need to meet with 4 prospective new clients each month, or you need to attend 2 networking events each month, or you need, activity-based goals that are meant to lead to the opportunity to propose and then win the work. Incentives. What we found in the research is that 3/4 of firms in our industries don't offer any type of incentive to seller doers. For those that do, 65%, 2/3 of firms said, well, it's part of the year-end bonus. But the challenge there is when you give a year-end bonus, do the seller doers understand that their involvement in selling was worth 25% of the value of the bonus, and then the project work was 75%? Or, hey, you got X $1,000 in bonus. You could have had Y had you met your goals as a salesperson for our firm. So next year, meet those business development goals, and you can, make even more money on your bonus. A lot of firms don't break it out that way, so it makes it difficult on the seller doer to even see the impact of their business development activities on their bonus. And then you can see here the other bonuses, types of incentives. Spot bonus with 17% of firms doing that. 14% are doing commissions on the dollars contracted, 12% on the commission on the dollars billed, 5% even time off benefits. So remember, though, this is only 25% of the firms. So Kaylee, time for another poll. Now we're going to look at the how critical seller doers are to your overall business development success. Take it away.
Alrighty, here's just your next reminder that if you need that CPE credit, to select an answer here and submit it. And again, the question is, going forward, how critical are seller doers to your overall business development success? So this is kind of a reactionary question to the first one that we posted here as our poll. So we have about 73% of the audience voted. We need 80% or to hit that minute mark to move on. Just waiting for a few more to get in here and answer. Just a reminder to select that you do need that CPE credit on the survey that pops up after the webinar. Alrighty, 86% have voted, so I'm gonna go ahead and close this out and share the results with everybody. All right, overwhelming, extremely important going forward. 86% of our audience answered this afternoon. 12% say somewhat important, and 2% say neither important or unimportant. We have no votes for not very important
There we go.
and not important at all. So kind of a trick
Now,
question, those two answers, Scott.
yeah, Kaylee, thank you so much for that. And, I expected that it was going to be really high, at least on somewhat important, because you're here on the webinar today, right? But, it just reinforces that the seller-doer model is here to stay. It's expanding at our firms, and we got to get it right. And one of the reasons we got to get it right is because of 2020 and 2021. And I'm not going to spend too much time on talking about economic indicators. There's just a couple things I wanted to point out. Last year, employment was down across the board in the design and construction industries. Now, the good news is that it wasn't as down as much as it was in the general economy or in other aspects of the economy. Still, this isn't sustainable. We can't have year-over-year losses in the number of employees that we have. One of the early indicators or the leading indicators we look at on the building side of the design and construction industry is the AIA's Architectural Billings Index. They look at billings, design contracts, and inquiries about potential new projects. And you can see here the most recent data, which what you're seeing on the screen here would be November and December 2020. Billings were down, and billings dropped even further from November to December. Design contracts were roughly the same, but it's a diffusion index. So any score below 50 is a decline. And if you happen to be tied to the building industry in the northeastern United States, well, for 22 consecutive months, architects have reported a decline in billings from the prior month. 22 months. This isn't sustainable. Sure, there are firms that are doing well in the Northeast. They're growing. But as an average of all the firms, the Northeast has been hit the hardest. This is just recent data come out from the U.S. Census Bureau. They track construction put in place. Now, this tends to be a lagging indicator because it's been designed, it's been constructed, but we can trend it from month to month, and we can see which of the 16 categories they're tracking are increasing and which are decreasing. And you'll see here more than half of them have been in decline. The most recent data that was just released was better than the prior month's data. But still, you're seeing growth in public safety, water supply, highway and street, sewage and waste disposal. And then once you get mostly on the building side of things, you're seeing declines from the prior year-over-year data. So we're looking at 2019 to 2020 December period. But you're seeing something positive here. If you look in the big orange circle, residential increased by 20%. That actually was an increase even over last month when comparing year-over-year data. So much of what's happening in the residential industry is driving the non-residential, because when you think about it, when you put in, especially new developments, when you put in a new neighborhood, you need roads to get there. You need roads around the development. You need utilities, so you need water, you need gas, you need sewer. You need manufacturing because you need the building materials, the sticks and the bricks that go in, the asphalt. Then think about what goes inside the house. So, we're talking about your drywall and your carpet, but then we're also talking about the appliances, the washers and dryers and microwaves and ranges. And then people move in. And what happens when people move in? Well, a lot of times it's younger families. They have school-aged children. So then the school districts look at the increasing population and they say, wow, we're going to need to expand schools. We're going to need to build a new school. And healthcare systems, they pay attention to this. They look at, most healthcare systems have that hub and spoke model, slightly disrupted during COVID, but the general trend has been pushing healthcare out to smaller clinics. So the doc in the box, the primary care, the urgent care, that sort of thing, they tend to pop up where you're seeing increasing population centers because of new neighborhoods. So it's just one thing leads to another. And so most of the non-residential construction is driven by residential construction. So that's a great leading indicator for us to see what's coming. And it's really positive of what's going to be coming the next few years for non-residential, because there's such a pent-up demand for, the house in the suburbs with grass and the white fence. And, there was a big dip in that after, during and after the Great Recession. And we've never fully recovered from that. But the trend is looking really positive. So that's going to drive us in the coming years. Might be familiar with the Dodge Momentum Index. Whenever Dodge Data and Analytics pulls a project into the database, one that's not just speculated on, but one that might have budget tied to it, may or may not have design professionals selected yet. They pull it in and they track it month to month to month. So, a single month isn't worth much as a single data point, but trended out, it tells us that over the past year, we've seen a decline of 14%. At least there was a little jump over this past month, but not a good indicator for us. ABC Construction Confidence Index, the last two readings in November and December data, you can see that, there's decreasing confidence when it comes to profits. But last month, there was a little bit of a jump with the sales expectations. Now, what I should warn, though, is that when we're looking at construction, at least for those contractors that are involved on the building side, what's happening now with the Architectural Billings Index typically catches up with contractors in roughly a year, 10 months to 18 months, somewhere in that time frame. So 2021 is going to have a lot of challenges across the industry, but particularly on contractors. And then finally, when you look at the construction forecast, Dodge Data looks at construction starts. They're projecting modest growth of 4% for the year. ABC's projecting 1.3%. FMI actually uses different data. They used construction put in place. So like the U.S. Census Bureau, so, they're seeing the impact of COVID 2020 on 2021 construction. But one of the things you need to keep in mind with this is it's not factoring in inflation. Construction inflation is running 2 to 3% right now. So that pretty much wipes out ABC's, meager 1.3. It's going to be negative if you do apple to apples comparison. And maybe that leaves the Dodge forecast with only really a 1 to 2% real increase when adjusting for inflation. So let's end here on talking about how to position seller doers for success this year. So Kaylee, let's take our final poll about what is the most important challenge with seller doers that we're going to address in 2021.
Alrighty, your options here for what's the top challenge that you're dealing with right now are providing training, establishing direction, creating and/or budgeting time, implementing accountability, and developing incentive programs. So again, this is the last and final poll question. So when you get to the survey at the end, please fill out that you do need that 1 CPE credit, as well as give us some feedback on the presentation today. I'm just waiting a few more moments here for either 80% participation, or our minute elapses. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll. We have about 86% of the crowd that has voted. So I'm going to go ahead and close and share. So a bunch of different results here. So 22% say their top challenge is going to be providing training to their staff. 28% say establishing direction is going to be their top challenge. 25% say creating and or budgeting the time. 20% say implementing accountability, and 5% say developing that incentive program for their seller doers.
That's good. Great. Thank you so much, Kaylee. So that shows that, these challenges that we've outlined, are pretty significant across the board, and maybe less desire for an incentive program, at least in the short term. And you'll see with the recommendations here moving forward, that's something that I kind of kicked down the street to maybe putting a plan in place this year as opposed to actually implementing something. So let's talk about your action plan for the year. So first thing I want to note is in our handout downloads, I have a cheat sheet for you. I'm going to talk about these topics, but there's a number of questions that you should be asking yourself and your colleagues as you're looking to improve your seller doer model moving forward. So, first step, provide training. Close to a quarter of you are looking to do that. And I want you to think of not just your current seller doers, but who are those people that are going to be tomorrow's seller doers? Who are those emerging leaders or that second tier of emerging leaders that maybe you could start pulling into training now, even though there's no expectation that they're going to be out there for another couple of years in their career. I've really found with the millennial generation that they're eager for knowledge. Even if they're not being asked to do business development, they want to learn about it because they want to do that as they advance in their career. So I told you my experience has been a little bit different when it comes to the request for training topics. Business development tools for seller doers has been the most requested of me. And actually, quick plug, our next webinar next month, I'm going to cover this for those of you that are able to attend. But look here, the second largest grouping of text is creating value messages. How do you create a value message on the fly that's unique and customized to your audience? Networking, expected. And this one I absolutely love, communicating with different personality types. So whether you're looking at the social styles or DISC, how do you communicate with somebody that's a D, the driver or the dominant, versus the I or the E with the different types of personality assessments? It's all about the communication and understanding how they're going to react one way versus another way. So firms are starting to see the importance of that. Seller doer introduction and time management is sort of that next tier that I've been seeing. And then I'll end here just talking about the yellow. So now we're really seeing the soft skills coming into play: verbal communication and active listening, written communication, emotional intelligence, hugely important, empathy, walking a mile in your clients or your prospects' shoes. And what I've seen with some of the firms I've been working with is they actually roll in the soft skills training broader in the organization, outside of just the seller doers. Budget weekly time for your seller doers. Let them focus on business development. So we all have these Monday morning staffing meetings where you look at, what Nancy's going to be doing, and Nancy has 24 hours here and 8 hours there, and we never put down business development for Nancy. So that's put in 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever our expectation is for Nancy, because that way she understands it, and that way the other project managers that might be vying for her time understand it. And I know you're looking at 40 hours a week and you're thinking, well, that's quaint. Yeah, you're working 50 hours a week. You're working hard, but make the math work and make sure you include business development as part of that. Create objectives or goals for your seller doers. Help them understand what's expected of them. You already know what a SMART goal is, but yet when it comes to goal writing, too often we don't have something that's specific and measurable and achievable and relevant and time-bound. And it's so simple. We're talking about a quick statement here. This could be for Nancy. So Nancy's going to identify the top 10 existing clients by revenue in the healthcare market by March 1st of this year. Or Bob's going to join the local chapter of IFMA by April 15th. These are what SMART goals are, but put them in front of your seller doers. Even better, have the seller doers work with you to develop those goals. You also might be familiar with OKRs. I enjoy OKRs. They come out of the book, Measure What Matters. OKRs are what's used at Google and Intel instead of SMART goals, but they're very similar. So you might have an objective for Nancy to increase existing client revenue for her existing clients this year. And then you might have some key results under that. So, at Nancy's company, they asked the question on the scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being highly likely and 1 being highly unlikely. How likely are you to recommend us to another firm? If you get an 8 or 9, it counts. If you get a 6 or below, it means they won't. And you subtract the lower from the upper, and that's your net promoter score. Attend a minimum of 3 hours of BD training every quarter. Review the service offerings annually with our clients, because we've all had that experience. We have an existing client we're working with. They hire a competitor to offer a service that we already provide. So we want to make sure we're doing annual reviews of our service offerings, our menu of services. Talk with your seller doers about what approach they're most comfortable using, because some seller doers are great at networking or great at cold calling or warm calling, which is even better. Others might prefer to be speaking at events or being on videos. Others might be really good bloggers. And I saw a statistic came out just today from Hinge Marketing, research specific to the AEC industry, that the highest, fastest growing firms in design and construction are seeing 50% of their leads coming inbound. So people are reading the blogs, they're attending the webinars, they're going to the presentations, and they're reaching out. A seller doer that can generate work from inbound doesn't have to do a lot of the outbound stuff they might not even be comfortable doing. So make that part of the equation. Find out where they want to be. Require that you're entering your activities, your BD activities into CRM. We want to know what our seller doers are doing. So when did they have that conversation? Who was it with? The organization, the contact. What type of contact was it? Was it a in-person meeting, a video meeting, a phone call, an email exchange? Is it tied to a project or an opportunity that you're tracking? Make notes on it. They need to make notes on it. And what's that follow-up activity? What are you going to do next? Who's going to do it? When's it going to be done? What is the activity? There's some firms out there that say if it's not in CRM, it didn't happen. So kind of make that a mantra that we need to collect this data. At Stanball Nest, we actually have a group that does advising on implementing Deltek Vision and Vantage Point. So you can believe we have a great CRM system at Stanball Nest. Meet regularly with your seller doers because you want to find out how things are going. Don't send them out and not talk to them for a year. This comes out of the book, Measure What Matters. I really like it. The CFR is conversations, feedback, and recognition. So, how are your goals coming along? What critical capabilities do you need to be successful? What resources do you need? It could be training. It could be other people. Is there anything stopping you from your objectives? What are those barriers that are in the way? Because as managers, our role is to remove barriers to help our employees succeed. And what OKRs or what goals need to be changed, adjusted, added, eliminated based upon your changing responsibilities, changes with the projects, changes with the economy, whatever the case may be. The feedback is you encourage one another to give feedback to each other. So it's often peer-to-peer. It could be seller-doer to manager, multi-directional. Where I used to work for a time, we had these great meetings that we would gather all our seller-doers. We called them account managers, but that was our term for seller-doer. And we get together for lunch once a month, and we just talk about lessons learned. I tried this. It worked. I failed at this. I have this meeting coming up. Anybody have some advice for me? It was great peer-to-peer sharing of information. And then recognition. We want peer-to-peer recognition. We want to catch people for doing something right. We might want to establish criteria for recognition. How are you going to be recognized? What steps need to be taken to get that? We want to share stories of people having success. Sue worked for 6 months to get in the door at this healthcare system, and she succeeded. Send out an email and applaud her efforts and her tenacity to get in the door. Make it frequent. Recognize people for the small things, not just the big things. And it's always excellent when you can specifically tie that activity they did as you recognize them to some broader marketing, business development, or strategic goal that the company has. And then finally, I said some things we might kick the can down the street a little further. We need to consider how we're going to address, who's in charge of seller doers, because it might be many people depending upon office location, depending upon the vertical industries that you serve. We might set some general accountability this year, set those goals, but make it more formal in 2022. And that's when we might want to implement some type of incentive program. Love this quote from Winston Churchill: perfection is the enemy of progress. And so I will leave you with a real quick story here. A sales mentor to me used to have this saying that in sales, 60% is good enough. And it comes out of the context of design and construction where, a structural engineer needs to design that structural system to 100% to get the labor and industry approvals. For health and safety, because you stop at 80%, the building might collapse, somebody might die. Well, we take that mentality and when we apply it to sales, we never have enough information before we pick up the phone and make that call or before we try to set up that meeting or we send that email. 60% is good enough. You've probably also heard this paraphrased as perfect is the enemy of done. So, Stanball Ness, I mentioned, we do help companies with seller doers, whether it's on the strategy side or the training side. Please watch for our blogs. We're going to be posting blogs regularly targeted to the seller doer audience. Hopefully, you had a chance to catch one about the 5 challenges of the seller doer model we posted last week. And then the webinars. And I know some of the questions that popped up, are the slides available for download? Yes, they are. You will find them on the handouts tab. There's other webinars that are forthcoming, like this one. So our next program is going to be business development tools for seller doers. So how can seller doers employ business development approaches? Find the ones that make the most sense for them. So we're even going to have a little bit of a worksheet that they can go through to figure out where they're good at, where they're bad at, and where they want to focus their efforts. So that's coming up the first week in March. You're going to get a link. Kaylee, tell me if I'm wrong here. You're going to get a link to this webinar once it's uploaded, so you will be able to watch it again. And again, there's 3 documents that we have for download available for you. That sort of cheat sheet on your 2021 action plan, the SMPS research, and then the slide deck. And I know there were several questions about that. So, Kaylee, you want to bring us home here?
Sure can. So like Scott said, those documents are available for download, and you will also get an email after the presentation as soon as we bundle up the recording nicely, and that will be posted on our website, and you will get an email alert about that as well. If you have any questions, dropped into the questions box, Scott will reach out to you personally and answer any of those questions there. If you think of any when you are on the survey, there is a spot to fill out there. And just a reminder, to get that CPE credit, you just need to check mark yes. And Scott's information is posted on the screen right now in order to reach out to him and connect with him on LinkedIn or shoot him an email there. So Scott, any other final words?
I really thank everybody for your time today. You can tell I'm passionate about this topic. Reach out to me if we connect on LinkedIn. I try to share resources of interest and value to seller doers and firm leaders and business developers. And send me a note, ask me a question. I'm always happy to help. So I hope this was a valuable hour out of your day and really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.